Moscow, 1941. The world shudders from the roar of cannons, and the capital of the Soviet Union prepares to repel an enemy attack. At this pivotal moment in history, a man whose name the entire country would soon know steps to the forefront of the defense. Yakov Grigorievich Kreizer, a colonel destined to become a general, a commander whose division would be the first in the Red Army to receive the honorary title of Guards. The son of a Jewish craftsman from Voronezh, who managed to rise to the heights of military art despite all the prejudices of his time. When German tank columns were tearing towards the heart of the country, it was Kreizer and his soldiers who stood in their path as an unbreakable wall. His 1st Moscow Motorized Rifle Division did not just hold back the onslaught. It inflicted such damage on the enemy that the Hitlerite command was forced to reconsider its plans for a lightning war. Ahead would be Yelnya and the counteroffensive near Moscow. But the beginning of the glorious path was laid in those hot July days of '41, when Colonel Kreizer proved the hitherto invincible Wehrmacht could be stopped. In 1905, when the Russian Empire was shaken by revolutionary upheavals, a son, Yakov, was born into the modest Jewish family of Voronezh craftsman Grigory Kreizer. No one could have predicted then that this boy was destined to become an outstanding military leader whose name would be etched in golden letters into the history of the defense of Moscow. Yakov's childhood fell on a turning point: the collapse of Tsarist Russia, the First World War, the Revolution, and the Civil War. These events shaped the character of the future general, tempered his will, and taught him resilience in the face of trials. The Kreizer family lived modestly. His father, a talented craftsman, instilled diligence and responsibility in his son from an early age. His mother surrounded the boy with care, but did not spoil him. Times were harsh, and children had to grow up quickly. Yakov grew up curious and purposeful, eagerly absorbing knowledge. In his school years, he showed extraordinary abilities in the exact sciences and organizational talent, which would later prove so useful to him in command positions. Young Kreizer dreamed of higher education, but the revolutionary events made adjustments to his plans. When the Civil War raged across the country, 17-year-old Yakov made a choice that determined his entire future destiny. In 1922, he voluntarily joined the Red Army. This step was not only a tribute to the revolutionary enthusiasm that gripped the youth, but also a conscious decision of a man who saw his calling in military service. The army became a true school of life for Yakov Kreizer. Here he found his place in the new Soviet society, where origin and nationality faded into the background before personal merits and devotion to the cause. For a Jewish youth from the provinces, this opened up unprecedented opportunities for social mobility. Commanders quickly noticed the outstanding abilities of the young Red Army soldier. His analytical mind, his ability to make quick decisions, and his natural inclination for military affairs. After only a year of service, Kreizer was sent to commander courses, and then to the Moscow Infantry School. Here his military thinking was formed, and the tactical style of the future general crystallized. Yakov eagerly absorbed military science, spending long hours poring over textbooks and maps, analyzing the experience of the First World War and the Civil War. He was distinguished by a systematic approach to solving tactical problems and unconventional thinking. It was these qualities that would later allow him to find a way out of the most difficult situations on the battlefields of the Great Patriotic War. In 1923, Yakov Kreizer entered the Moscow Infantry School, one of the leading military educational institutions of the young Soviet Republic. Here, within the walls of the former Alexander Military School, the cadres of the new Red Army were forged. For 20-year-old Yakov, this was the first serious step in his military career. His studies came easily to him. Natural quick wit, an analytical mind, and tireless diligence set him apart from his comrades. Teachers noted his ability to quickly grasp tactical concepts and find unconventional solutions to training combat tasks. Kreizer particularly excelled in practical field exercises, where his talent for spatial thinking and organizing the interaction of various branches of service was evident. Having graduated from the infantry school with honors, Kreizer was appointed platoon commander. Thus began his path as a line officer, who rose through all ranks of the Army hierarchy, from platoon to Army. This experience of sequentially commanding units of different levels later gave him a deep understanding of the Army organism, which advantageously distinguished him from many military leaders who skipped several ranks. In the 1930s, the Red Army was undergoing a period of active modernization and technical re-equipment. Kreizer, by then already a company commander and then a battalion commander, eagerly mastered new equipment and weaponry. He understood that a future war would be a war of engines and sought to thoroughly study the capabilities of tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery. This interest in the technical aspects of military affairs, combined with his talent for organizing the interaction of various branches of service, would later make him one of the best commanders of mechanized formations. In 1931, the capable commander was sent to study at the Voronezh Military Academy, the forge of senior command cadres. The years spent at the academy became a time of intense intellectual growth for Kreizer. He deeply studied military history, strategy, and operational art, and became acquainted with the advanced military theories of his time. Yakov paid particular attention to the works of Tukhachevsky, Triumphant, and other Soviet military theorists who developed the concept of deep operation and the theory of sequential operations. These ideas profoundly influenced the formation of his own tactical views. The academic years broadened Kreizer's horizons, taught him to think on a grand scale, to see not only the tactical, but also the operational strategic picture. After graduating from the academy, Kreizer's career developed rapidly. He commanded a battalion, a regiment, and in 1938, at the age of 33, became a rifle division commander. This was a time of dramatic changes in the Red Army. The repressions of 1937 to 38 decapitated many formations, and young officers were promoted to command positions. Kreizer managed to navigate this dangerous period without losses, focusing on the professional execution of his duties. In the pre-war years, he actively participated in reforming his formation, introduced new methods of combat training, and achieved coordinated actions of all units. He paid special attention to the interaction of infantry with tanks and artillery. This experience would prove invaluable in the first days of the Great Patriotic War. On June 22, 1941, the peaceful life of the Soviet Union was shattered by the roar of German bombs and shells. The war, which had been so long delayed, finally came to Soviet soil. On this fateful day, Colonel Yakov Kreizer commanded the 1st Moscow Motorized Rifle Division, stationed in the capital. This elite unit, equipped with the best technology and trained fighters, was intended to be the Stavka's reserve. But the rapid advance of German troops forced the command to throw the division into the most dangerous sector of the front. Already on June 24, Kreizer received orders to advance to the Berezina River line in Belarus. There was no time to waste. The division urgently loaded onto trains and set off to meet the enemy. The Germans had broken through the defenses of the western districts, and now Guderian's tank wedges were irresistibly pushing towards Minsk and Smolensk, opening the way to Moscow. The 1st Moscow had to hold their advance at all costs. Kreizer understood the gravity of the situation. Unlike many commanders of that time, he harbored no illusions of an easy victory. Having studied German tactics for years, he knew what a formidable opponent he would face. But there was no panic in him, only composure and determination. Upon arriving in the Borisov area, the division immediately engaged in battle. Kreizer personally directed the deployment of units, selected positions for artillery, and organized anti-tank defenses. His command post was in close proximity to the front line. The colonel preferred to see the battlefield with his own eyes. This was his principle, not to sit in the rear, but to be where the outcome of the battle was decided. The first serious clash with the enemy occurred on July 1st at the crossing over the Berezina. Guderian's tank units, accustomed to easy victories without serious resistance, were met with an unpleasant surprise here. Kreizer's division's artillerymen, skillfully positioned on dominant heights, opened aimed fire on German columns. Anti-tank guns fired direct hits, destroying leading vehicles and creating traffic jams on the roads. Infantry, supported by armored vehicles, counterattacked breakthrough enemy groups. Kreizer skillfully maneuvered small mobile detachments, creating the impression for the Germans that they had encountered large forces. This was a tactic of active defense, not just repelling attacks, but launching counterattacks, exhausting the enemy, forcing them to lose time regrouping. In critical moments, the colonel himself appeared in threatened areas, inspiring soldiers by his personal example. Once, when German tanks broke through to the command post, Kreizer led a counterattack of a reserve battalion, pushing back the enemy and restoring the situation. Another time, he personally adjusted the fire of an artillery battery that was under attack. His coolness and composure in the most difficult situations instilled confidence in his subordinates. For 5 days, Kreizer's division held back the onslaught of superior enemy forces on the Berezina line. 5 days of bloody battles, where every hour cost immense effort. The Germans threw new units into the attack, trying to break the resistance of the Soviet troops. But Colonel Kreizer skillfully organized an all-round defense, making the most of the terrain and available forces. The division's artillerymen were particularly distinguished. Their accurate fire inflicted serious damage on enemy tank units. Dozens of destroyed German vehicles remained on the approaches to Soviet positions. Even when neighboring units retreated and the division found itself semi-encircled, Kreizer did not flinch. He led his battalions out of the attack in an organized manner, fighting, maintaining combat order, and not abandoning heavy weapons. This maneuver earned respect even from the enemy. German officers later noted the high organization and steadfastness of units under Kreizer's command. At dawn on July 3rd, Guderian's tank units approached the city of Borisov, a key point on the way to Minsk and further on to Moscow. Here, at the crossing over the Berezina, they were met by Colonel Kreizer's 1st Moscow Motorized Rifle Division. What transpired in the following days went down in history as a legendary battle, where Soviet infantry managed to halt the seemingly invincible German tank wedges. Kreizer brilliantly utilized the terrain features. His artillery batteries occupied commanding heights, while anti-tank guns were skillfully camouflaged in tank-dangerous directions. The colonel understood that in a head-on collision, his division would not withstand the blow of Guderian's armored fist, so he relied on mobile defense. "We have no right to retreat," Kreizer told his commanders at the last meeting before the battle. "Every hour we gain here is an hour Moscow gets to prepare its defenses." When the first German tanks appeared on the approaches to Borisov, they were met with organized fire from Soviet artillery. The anti-tank gun crews acted coolly, selecting targets and hitting them with the first shots. Infantrymen, armed with Molotov cocktails, attacked enemy armored vehicles from cover. The Germans, accustomed to easy victories in the early days of the war, were disheartened by the fierce resistance. Their attempts to bypass Soviet positions from the flanks ran into mobile screens prepared by Kreizer in advance. The colonel skillfully maneuvered his limited reserves, transferring them to threatened sectors. At a critical moment of the battle, when breakthrough German tanks threatened the division headquarters, Kreizer personally led a counterattack. With a pistol in his hand, he led a reserve battalion into the attack and repelled the enemy. In this battle, the colonel was wounded but remained in action, continuing to direct the defense. For 4 days, Kreizer's division held the line at Borisov, tying up significant forces of Guderian's tank group. During this time, the Soviet command was able to organize a new line of defense further east. When the order to retreat came, the division orderly, fighting its way, withdrew to new positions, preserving its combat effectiveness and most of its heavy weaponry. For this feat, by decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on July 22, 1941, Colonel Yakov Grigorievich Kreizer was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. He became one of the first heroes of the Great Patriotic War and the first Jewish officer to be awarded this high title. The award citation noted, "Comrade Kreizer displayed exceptional courage and bravery in battles against German fascism. Through skillful organization of defense and active actions of the division's units, he inflicted heavy losses on the enemy in manpower and equipment, delaying its advance in a most important direction." September 18, 1941, marked a turning point in the history of the Red Army. On this day, the 1st Moscow Motorized Rifle Division, under the command of Yakov Kreizer, received the honorable designation of First Guards. This was an unprecedented decision. For the first time in the history of the Soviet armed forces, a guard was being created, elite units upon which special hopes were placed. The order to transform the division into a Guards division was read out before the formation of soldiers and commanders. Many of them, who had endured the toughest battles near Borisov and Yelnya, did not hide their tears. This recognition was not just a formality. It signified the acknowledgement of their exceptional courage, resilience, and combat prowess at the highest level. The Guards are not just a new name. Yakov Kreizer, by then already promoted to Major General, told his soldiers. It is a special responsibility. Now the whole country will look to us as an example to follow. And we have no right to fail this example. Why exactly did Kreizer's division receive such an honor? The criteria were extremely strict. The unit had to demonstrate exceptional resilience in defense, decisiveness in offense, high discipline, and organization. The 1st Moscow fully met these requirements. In the battles near Borisov, the division held back the onslaught of Guderian's tank units, inflicting serious damage on them and gaining precious time to organize defenses in the Moscow direction. In the Yelnya operation, it acted in the vanguard of the advancing Soviet troops, demonstrating examples of tactical skill and combat cohesion. Especially valuable was the fact that the division maintained combat effectiveness in the most difficult conditions of the first months of the war, when many units of the Red Army were defeated or scattered. Kreizer managed not only to maintain command and control of the troops, but also to establish clear interaction between all branches of arms: infantry, artillery, tanks, and engineering units. The birth of the Guards was of immense importance for the morale of Soviet troops. In the most difficult months of retreat, when the enemy was rushing towards Moscow, the appearance of elite units, marked with a special insignia, instilled confidence in soldiers and commanders. This was a signal. Despite temporary setbacks, the army was alive. It was fighting, and among its ranks were units capable of confronting the best units of the Wehrmacht on equal terms. Following Kreizer's division, other distinguished units also received the title of Guards. But the First Guards forever remained the first, the one that paved the way, created traditions, and set the standards for all subsequent Guards units. In late August 1941, the Soviet command decided to launch the Yelnya offensive operation, the first major counteroffensive operation of the Red Army in the Great Patriotic War. Its strategic importance can hardly be overestimated. The Yelnya salient, deeply wedged into the Soviet defense, posed a serious threat. From here, the Germans could strike Moscow from the southwest. Eliminating this salient became a vital task to ensure the security of the capital. The 1st Guards Motorized Rifle Division, under the command of Yakov Kreizer, was to play a key role in this operation. Major General Kreizer meticulously prepared for the upcoming battles. He personally flew over the area of the future offensive in a U-2 aircraft, studying the terrain features and the disposition of German troops. Then, together with regimental commanders, he conducted reconnaissance on the front line, identifying the most vulnerable sectors of the enemy's defense. Kreizer paid particular attention to the interaction of infantry with artillery and tanks. He understood that the success of the offensive depended on the coordinated actions of all branches of service. At a meeting with commanders, Kreizer emphasized, "This comprehensive approach became a hallmark of Kreizer's command style." The offensive began on August 30th. Soviet troops attacked the enemy from several directions, aiming to cut off the Yelnya salient at its base. Kreizer's division struck from the north, with the task of breaking through the enemy's defenses and linking up with units advancing from the south. The Germans offered fierce resistance. They had transformed the Yelnya salient into a powerful fortified area with an extensive system of trenches, pillboxes, and minefields. At every line, they had to overcome furious enemy resistance. Here, Kreizer's tactical talent was fully displayed. He skillfully maneuvered forces, concentrating them on the direction of the main thrust. When frontal attacks faltered, the general organized flanking maneuvers, getting to the flank and rear of German positions. He paid special attention to reconnaissance. Special groups continuously gathered intelligence about the enemy, which allowed for precise identification of firing points and reserves. Kreizer was constantly in the combat formations of the troops, personally directing the actions of the leading battalions. In critical moments, he appeared in the most dangerous areas, inspiring the soldiers by personal example. Once, when a German counterattack threatened to break through the division's positions, Kreizer gathered a reserve company and personally led it into battle, restoring the situation. 6 days of fierce fighting for the Yelnya salient continued. Kreizer's division, overcoming stubborn enemy resistance, slowly but steadily advanced. On September 6th, Soviet troops liberated the city of Yelnya and completely eliminated the dangerous salient. This was the first major victory of the Red Army in the Great Patriotic War. The success of the Yelnya operation had enormous strategic and moral significance. A dangerous enemy bridgehead threatening Moscow was eliminated. But even more important was that Soviet troops proved that the German army could not only be stopped, but also successfully routed in offensive operations. This instilled confidence in soldiers and commanders, raising the morale of the entire Red Army. For his skillful leadership of troops in the Yelnya operation, Yakov Kreizer was awarded the Order of Lenin, and his division received the honorary title of First Guards. Kreizer's tactical style in this operation became a model for many Soviet commanders. His methods: thorough reconnaissance, concentration of forces on the direction of the main thrust, flexible maneuvering, clear interaction of branches of service, were subsequently widely applied in other offensive operations of the Red Army. By October 1941, the situation on the approaches to Moscow had become critical. The German command launched Operation Typhoon, throwing immense forces at the Soviet capital. Over 1 million soldiers, 1,900 tanks, and more than 1,000 aircraft. The 1st Guards Division, under the command of Major General Kreizer, took up defensive positions on the Mozhaisk direction, one of the key sectors of the Battle of Moscow. Yakov Grigorievich understood that the fate not only of the capital, but of the entire country was being decided here. He personally inspected the positions, checking the readiness of units to repel the enemy offensive. He paid particular attention to anti-tank defense. The experience of battles near Borisov had taught him how to effectively combat German tanks. Anti-tank areas were established throughout the depth of the defense. Artillery positions were camouflaged, and engineering obstacles were prepared. When German tank columns advanced on the division's positions, they were met with organized fire from Soviet artillery. Kreizer skillfully directed the battle, maneuvering reserves and covering dangerous sectors. At the most critical moments, the general appeared in the infantry's combat formations, inspiring the soldiers by personal example. His coolness and confidence were passed on to his subordinates. Even when neighboring units retreated, Kreizer's division continued to hold its positions. This allowed precious time to be gained for bringing up reserves and strengthening Moscow's defenses. In November, when the German offensive ran out of steam, the Stavka began preparing a counterattack. Kreizer was summoned to Moscow to participate in developing the plan for the counteroffensive. His combat experience and tactical thinking were highly valued by the command. At a meeting at the Stavka, Yakov Grigorievich proposed a number of original solutions for organizing a breakthrough of German defenses, especially in winter conditions. Upon returning to the division, the general launched intensive preparations of units for the offensive. Soldiers trained to operate in deep snow, perform flanking maneuvers on skis, and attack fortified enemy positions. Particular attention was paid to the interaction of infantry with tanks and artillery. On December 5, 1941, Soviet troops launched a counteroffensive. Kreizer's 1st Guards Division operated on one of the key directions of the strike. Skillfully using maneuver and surprise, the Guardsmen broke through the enemy's defenses and began to advance rapidly. The Germans, not expecting such a powerful counterblow, were forced to retreat hastily. Kreizer personally directed the actions of the forward units, being in the combat formations. His decisiveness and tactical skill allowed the division to liberate dozens of settlements in a few days. For his skillful leadership of troops in the counteroffensive near Moscow, Yakov Kreizer was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. His division became a model for the entire Red Army, proving that it was possible to successfully transition from defense to a decisive offensive. The December morning of '41 greeted the soldiers of the 1st Guards Motorized Rifle Division with biting frost and blinding snow. The thermometer showed 30 degrees below zero, but the guardsmen's mood was resolute. Finally, to advance, not to defend. Major General Yakov Kreizer, wrapped in a sheepskin coat, inspected the positions of his battalions before the attack. His presence at the front line at such a crucial moment gave the soldiers confidence. Kreizer addressed the commanders at the last meeting. Kreizer developed an unconventional breakthrough plan. Instead of a frontal attack along the entire line, he concentrated the main forces on a narrow sector, creating a powerful fist. A special role was assigned to ski battalions, which were to bypass German strongholds from the flanks and attack from the rear. The artillery preparation was brief but intense, so as not to allow the enemy to recover. At 5 o'clock in the morning on December 6th, the guns of the 1st Guards opened hurricane fire on German positions. 30 minutes later, the infantry, supported by tanks, moved to attack. The Germans, not expecting an offensive in such a frost, were demoralized. Many firing points were suppressed by artillery, and those that survived were suppressed by assault groups. Kreizer was in the combat formations of the advanced battalion, personally coordinating the actions of the units. When the offensive on one of the sectors slowed down due to heavy machine gun fire, the general quickly transferred a company of submachine gunners there, which flanked the German position and decided the outcome of the battle. By noon, the enemy's defense had been broken through to a depth of 5 kilometers. Now the main task was not to allow the Germans to organize a new line of defense. Kreizer ordered the advanced detachments not to stop, to pursue the retreating enemy, not allowing him to entrench. Ski battalions, operating independently of the main forces, cut off retreat routes, creating panic in the rear of the German units. Quote 2. These words of the general were passed from commander to commander. The guardsmen, despite fatigue and frost, continued the offensive. By the end of the first day, the division had advanced 10 kilometers, liberating several settlements. Tankers had an especially difficult time. Deep snow and frost created additional difficulties for the equipment. Engines refused to start, tracks slipped in snowdrifts. But the crews showed miracles of ingenuity. They warmed engines with bonfires, laid column routes, helped each other pull out stuck vehicles. Kreizer skillfully coordinated the actions of his division with neighboring formations. Constantly maintaining contact with Army Command, he secured artillery support in key directions, requested aviation for strikes against enemy concentrations. Such interaction greatly amplified the effect of the offensive. On the third day of the operation, the division encountered serious resistance near a large village, which the Germans had turned into a fortified stronghold. Frontal attacks yielded no success. The enemy met the advancing troops with heavy fire. Kreizer decided not to storm the village head-on, but to bypass it from two sides, cutting off the garrison from the main forces. The maneuver succeeded. By evening, the encircled Germans began to surrender. This tactic, avoiding frontal attacks, seeking weak points in the enemy's defenses, acting with flanking maneuvers, became Kreizer's signature style in the winter offensive. It allowed for saving forces and minimizing losses, which was especially important in the harsh winter conditions. By mid-December, the 1st Guards Motorized Rifle Division had advanced 40 kilometers, liberating dozens of settlements. The Germans, unprepared for combat operations in winter conditions, suffered defeat after defeat. Panic grew in their ranks. Wehrmacht soldiers, who had recently considered themselves invincible, now fled, abandoning equipment and weapons. Yakov Kreizer was not just a talented strategist. He possessed a rare gift as a commander, adept at finding an individual approach to every soldier. His leadership style differed significantly from many other military leaders of that era. Instead of shouts and threats, there was calm confidence. Instead of orders from distant rear lines, there was his personal presence at the front. Instead of demanding blind obedience, there was an explanation of the combat mission's purpose. Quote O recalled Artillery Regiment Commander Vasily Kozakov later. Quote, "The general considered it important to know not only the names of his commanders, but also the peculiarities of each of their characters. He understood that some performed better under pressure, others needed support, and still others unlocked their potential when entrusted with independent decision-making. This ability to see subordinates as individuals, rather than an impersonal mass of performers, set Kreizer apart from other commanders. The story with Battalion Commander Leonid Smirnov is illustrative. After an unsuccessful attack, the young officer expected severe punishment. Instead, Kreizer took him aside and calmly asked, quote, "Together, they analyzed the mistakes, and in the next battle, Smirnov's battalion performed flawlessly. He knew how to teach without humiliating," Smirnov recounted later. "After talking with the division commander, I didn't want to sink into the ground, but rather to prove that I was capable of more." A distinctive feature of Kreizer's command style was his ability to delegate authority. He did not seek to control every step of his subordinates, but set a clear task and provided freedom in choosing how to accomplish it. This approach fostered initiative among officers, enabling them to make independent decisions in rapidly changing combat situations. At the same time, the general was demanding in the execution of orders. "An order is law, not subject to discussion," he often repeated. But this demanding nature was combined with deep respect for his subordinates. Kreizer never allowed the humiliation of soldiers and officers, believing that a commander who loses self-control also loses authority. Another important trait of Kreizer was his concern for the needs of his fighters. He personally checked the quality of food in field kitchens, oversaw the provision of warm clothing in winter, and demanded maximum attention to the wounded from the medical battalion. "A soldier must know that he is being cared for," the general said. "Only then will he fight with full force." Veterans of the 1st Guards recalled how in December 41, during the counteroffensive near Moscow, Kreizer ordered the frontline companies to be supplied with felt boots first, while he himself continued to wear boots wrapped in footcloths. Such actions earned the deep respect of the fighters and created a special atmosphere of trust between the commander and his subordinates. After the victory in the Battle of Moscow, Yakov Kreizer's military career continued to develop rapidly. In early 1942, he was appointed commander of a rifle corps, and by the end of the same year, he led the Third Army on the Bryansk front. This promotion reflected the growing trust of the High Command in his military leadership talents. Kreizer quickly proved himself not only as a tactician capable of winning individual battles, but also as an operational strategic-level military leader, able to plan and conduct large-scale operations. Commanding the army, Yakov Grigorievich participated in key battles of the second period of the war. Under his leadership, the Third Army distinguished itself in the Orel offensive operation in the summer of 1943. Kreizer masterfully organized the breakthrough of powerful German defenses, employing a comprehensive approach. Massive artillery strikes on identified resistance nodes, the introduction of assault groups to destroy strongholds, and the subsequent development of success by mobile formations. This signature style of Kreizer, meticulous preparation, concentration of forces in decisive directions, and rapid development of success, became his hallmark as an army commander. Kreizer's military leadership talent was especially vividly revealed in the Belarusian strategic operation Bagration in the summer of 1944. His army operated in one of the key directions, breaking through deeply echeloned enemy defenses. Kreizer skillfully applied the tactic of sequential effort buildup, where after breaking through the first line of defense, fresh units were introduced into battle, preventing the enemy from recovering and organizing resistance on subsequent lines. For successful leadership of troops in this operation, Yakov Grigorievich was awarded the Order of Suvorov, First Class. In the final period of the war, Kreizer's army participated in the liberation of Poland and battles on German territory. Here, his ability to conduct offensive operations in complex urban environments was fully demonstrated. Kreizer developed an effective method for storming cities that minimized personnel losses. A combination of flanking maneuvers with the actions of small assault groups reinforced by flamethrowers and sappers. Interestingly, as the scale of his command positions grew, Kreizer did not lose his characteristic leadership style. Even when commanding an army, he often visited the front lines, personally assessing the situation and making decisions on the spot. This habit sometimes caused concern among the higher command, but Kreizer believed that only in this way could one truly understand the situation and make the right decision. Over the years of the war, Kreizer's military leadership style underwent a noticeable evolution. If at the beginning of the war, he relied on rigid defense and counterattacks, by the middle of the war, he had fully mastered the art of deep offensive operations. He learned to conserve forces economically, accurately identify weak points in enemy defenses, and concentrate strikes precisely there. Kreizer paid special attention to intelligence. Without accurate data on the enemy, he never began an operation. By the end of the war, Yakov Grigorievich had become one of the most experienced and respected army commanders of the Red Army. His contribution to the victory was marked by numerous awards, including 2 Orders of Lenin, 3 Orders of the Red Banner, and Orders of Suvorov and Kutuzov, First Class. But the main reward for him was the reputation of a commander who preserved soldiers' lives and achieved victory not by numbers, but by skill. In May 1945, when the salvos of the victory salute died down, Colonel General Kreizer could proudly look back at the path he had traveled. From a colonel commanding a division in the early days of the war to an army commander whose troops stormed Berlin, such was his military fate, reflecting the heroic path of the entire Red Army from tragic defeats to great victory. Yakov Kreizer's position in the Red Army was truly unique. Among the high command of the Red Army, officers of Jewish origin were extremely rare, especially in positions of division commanders and above. The national policy of the Soviet Union, despite official internationalism, in practice had a complex and contradictory character. Hidden anti-Semitism, inherited from Tsarist Russia, never disappeared, but merely took on new, less overt forms. In these conditions, Kreizer's career path was full of invisible barriers that had to be overcome, not only by military skill, but also by exceptional strength of character. In the pre-war years, as Yakov Grigorievich rose through the ranks, he repeatedly encountered wary attitudes. Some colleagues whispered behind his back that a Jew had no place in the high command. Others tried to explain his successes by some mythical connections. But Kreizer never paid attention to these rumors. He preferred to respond with actions, not words. His impeccable service, deep knowledge of military affairs, and organizational talent spoke for themselves. When the Great Patriotic War began, the national question receded into the background in the face of mortal danger. Now, what was valued was not biographical data, but the ability to stop the enemy's offensive, organize defense, and lead soldiers into a counterattack. And here, Kreizer proved himself an outstanding commander. His feat near Voronezh, when he and his division held back Guderian's tank units, made his name known throughout the country. It is noteworthy that German propaganda, learning of Kreizer's Jewish origin, tried to use this fact for its own purposes. Leaflets dropped over Soviet troop positions stated, however, these attempts to sow national discord were unsuccessful. The soldiers of the 1st Guards Division were proud of their commander and were ready to follow him through fire and water. For them, he was, first and foremost, a talented military leader, a man of exceptional courage and integrity. One veteran of the division recalled, "The awarding of the title Hero of the Soviet Union to Kreizer in July 1941 was of particular significance. He became the first Jewish officer to receive this highest award in the Great Patriotic War. This was not only a recognition of his personal courage, but also an important signal for the entire country. In a time of trial, what is valued is not nationality, but loyalty to the oath, military skill, and readiness to give one's life for the motherland." However, even after this, Kreizer still encountered prejudice. Some old-school staff officers regarded the Jewish commander with distrust. There were instances when his orders were executed with delay or not in full. Kreizer never complained about this and did not seek protection from higher authorities. He simply demanded strict adherence to orders and, through his successful actions, forced skeptics to change their minds. His ability to overcome national prejudices was particularly evident when he took command of an army. At this level of command, a military leader required not only tactical skill, but also the ability to build relationships with party organs, industrial leaders, and commanders of neighboring formations. And here, Kreizer showed himself to be a brilliant diplomat. He never emphasized his nationality, but he also did not hide it. He was simply a Soviet general, devoted to his country and the cause of victory over the enemy. Over the years, Kreizer's authority in the army became so high that any talk about his nationality was considered inappropriate. He earned the respect not only of his subordinates, but also of his peers and even superior commanders. Marshal Zhukov, not prone to giving compliments, spoke of him as a, quote, "The fate of Yakov Kreizer is a vivid example of how talent, courage, and strength of character help overcome any prejudices." In the most difficult years of trials, he proved that true patriotism does not depend on nationality, but is measured by the readiness to give all one's strength and, if necessary, one's life for one's country. The victorious May of 1945 opened a new chapter in the biography of Colonel General Yakov Kreizer. The hero of the defense of Moscow, an army commander who traveled from the Berezina to Berlin, now had to apply his experience and talent in peacetime. Kreizer's post-war service began with his appointment as commander of the troops of the South Ural Military District. This was a time when the army was transitioning to a peaceful footing, while maintaining combat readiness in the context of the nascent Cold War. In his new post, Yakov Grigorievich proved himself to be a far-sighted military leader and a talented organizer. He perfectly understood that the experience of the Great Patriotic War needed to be preserved and passed on to the younger generation of officers. At his initiative, conferences and seminars were regularly held in the district, where veterans shared their combat experience with young commanders. Kreizer paid special attention to training officers for operations in modern conditions, when mechanized units and aviation played an increasingly important role on the battlefield. In 1953, Colonel General Kreizer headed the Carpathian Military District, one of the key ones in the defense system of the western borders of the USSR. This appointment testified to the high trust of the country's leadership. Here, his talent as a military reformer was fully revealed. Kreizer was one of the first to realize the importance of introducing the latest technologies into army practice. Under his leadership, the district's troops mastered new types of weapons, improved the tactics of using missile forces and air defense systems. However, Kreizer's position in the highest military hierarchy remained difficult. The post-war wave of anti-Semitism, which peaked during the Doctors' Plot, did not bypass the army. Some promising appointments bypassed the general, despite his impeccable reputation and military merits. Nevertheless, Kreizer never allowed himself to complain or seek special treatment. He simply continued to serve honestly, as he had done all his life. An important stage in Yakov Grigorievich's career was his participation in the development of a new military doctrine of the USSR in the late 50s and early 60s. Based on his rich combat experience, Kreizer advocated for the balanced development of all branches of the armed forces. While many military leaders relied exclusively on nuclear weapons, he insisted on maintaining powerful ground forces capable of conducting maneuver warfare in various conditions. In 1961, Colonel General Kreizer was appointed first Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet ground forces. This was the peak of his military career. In this position, he made a significant contribution to the modernization of the army, increasing its mobility and firepower. He paid special attention to the training of command personnel, believing that even the most modern equipment is useless without competent officers. Kreizer's last years of service fell during a period of active development of military theory and practice in the context of the Cold War. Yakov Grigorievich was one of the few military leaders who could combine the experience of classical operations of the Great Patriotic War with an understanding of modern requirements for conducting hostilities. His analytical articles in military journals and speeches at conferences shaped the strategic thinking of a new generation of Soviet officers. In November 1969, Colonel General Yakov Grigorievich Kreizer passed away. The country lost an outstanding military leader whose path from division commander to one of the leaders of the Soviet Army reflected the heroic and complex history of an entire era. The legacy of General Yakov Kreizer extends far beyond his personal military achievements. He created a unique school of tactical thinking that became the foundation for training a whole generation of Soviet officers. The 1st Guards Motor Rifle Division under his command became a true forge of military personnel, from which dozens of talented regimental and divisional commanders emerged. Kreizer developed a special method of troop training based on the principle of learn what is necessary in war. He was the first to introduce the practice of comprehensive exercises, maximally close to combat conditions. Soldiers trained under conditions of noise exposure, smoke, on rough terrain, day and night. This approach, revolutionary for its time, was subsequently adopted throughout the Soviet Army. Kreizer paid special attention to the interaction of various branches of service. He believed that modern combat is a symphony, where each instrument must sound in unison with the others. Infantry, artillery, tanks, engineering units, all must act as a single mechanism. This principle became the cornerstone of Soviet military doctrine in the post-war period. A unique tactical maneuver developed by Kreizer was the echeloned attack. Its essence lay in the sequential introduction of fresh units into battle. which prevented the enemy from regrouping and organizing a strong defense. This method was successfully applied in the Yelnya operation and the counteroffensive near Moscow. After Kreizer was transferred to the position of corps commander and then army commander, the First Guards continued to preserve the traditions laid down by its first commander. New divisional commanders considered it a matter of honor to maintain the high standards of combat training and morale established by Kreizer. The combat path of the First Guards was marked by many glorious pages. The division participated in the liberation of Smolensk, Belarus, and the Baltic states. For exemplary performance of combat missions, it was awarded the Orders of Lenin, the Red Banner, and Suvorov. But the main award for veterans always remained the Guards title, received under Kreizer's command. After the war, the First Guards became one of the elite formations of the Soviet Army. Serving in it was considered a high honor for any officer. The division was one of the first to master the latest models of weapons and equipment, and developed advanced methods of combat training. The memory of Yakov Kreizer was carefully preserved in the division. A museum was created at the unit's location, where a central place was occupied by an exhibition dedicated to the first commander. Annually, Kreizer readings were held, where the general's combat experience was studied and summarized. Young officers were required to familiarize themselves with his tactical maneuvers and methods of troop control. The influence of Kreizer on the development of the Soviet military school can hardly be overestimated. Many of his ideas and concepts, which seemed revolutionary in the 1940s, became axioms of military art. His approach to organizing defense, the methodology for breaking through fortified enemy positions, tactics for operations in urban conditions. All this entered the textbooks of military academies. Today, the traditions laid down by Yakov Kreizer continue to live on in the modern armed forces of Russia. One of the streets in Moscow bears his name, and memorial plaques have been erected in his honor in the cities he defended and liberated. But the main monument to the great commander remains his military legacy. Principles and methods that still help Russian officers improve their skills. The name of Yakov Grigorievich Kreizer is forever inscribed in the history of Russia as a symbol of courage, military talent, and indomitable will. His life path, from the son of a Jewish craftsman to colonel general, from division commander to deputy commander-in-chief of the ground forces, serves as a vivid example of how personal qualities and dedication to a cause allow one to overcome any obstacles. Today, looking back at General Kreizer's legacy, we see not just an outstanding military leader, but a man whose strategic decisions and tactical innovations were ahead of their time. Many of his methods of warfare, principles of troop command, and approaches to personnel training remain relevant in modern military science. Particularly valuable for the current Russian armed forces is Kreizer's experience in organizing defense in conditions of enemy superiority. What he demonstrated near Borisov in the summer of '41, when with limited forces he managed to delay Guderian's tank armada, is still studied in military academies as a model of tactical mastery. No less important is his experience in conducting offensive operations. The methods developed by Kreizer for breaking through fortified enemy defenses, the tactics of echeloned attacks, and the principles of interaction between different branches of service form the basis of modern military doctrine. Nowadays, the memory of General Kreizer is immortalized in many cities of Russia. Streets in Moscow, Voronezh, Smolensk are named after him. Exhibitions telling about his combat path have been created in military museums. Documentary films and books introduce new generations to the feat of the defender of Moscow. However, the best monument to Yakov Grigorievich remains the military traditions he established in the First Guards Division. These traditions, high professionalism, initiative, mutual assistance, care for subordinates, continue to live on in the modern Russian army. Preserving the memory of people like Yakov Kreizer is of great importance for educating future defenders of the fatherland. His life path demonstrates that true patriotism does not depend on nationality or origin. It is measured by the readiness to give all one's strength, knowledge, and if necessary, life for one's country. The story of General Kreizer is a lesson for our time, a lesson in courage, professionalism, and humanity. A lesson in how an individual can influence the course of history, even in the most difficult times. And as long as the memory of such people lives, so does the connection between generations, which forms the basis of national identity.